The church was full. The music had already started. Roman Voss stood in the back row, uninvited, still wearing his travel coat. He'd come straight from the airport without thinking. He hadn't known whose wedding it was until he saw the program. He hadn't known she was even in the country. What he couldn't explain was why, when the flower girl passed him in the aisle, he felt something cold move through his chest, something that had nothing to do with the bride. Before we begin, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Roman hadn't wanted to come. 2 years of silence between him and Alexei. 2 years of unanswered calls, returned invitations, and a family that had slowly learned to hold gatherings without him. When the wedding notice came, it was formal, printed card, gold lettering, the kind of thing you send to someone you're obligated to include but don't expect to show up. Roman hadn't planned to show up either. But his flight landed early, his hotel wasn't ready, and some part of him, a part he hadn't listened to in a long time, said, "Go. Reconnect. He's still your brother." So he went. No gift. No RSVP. Travel coat still on his shoulders. He slipped into the last pew as the organ started and picked up the folded program from the empty seat beside him. Alexei Voss and Elena. He didn't finish reading. Because the doors at the far end of the church opened, and the bride stepped into the light. Roman knew her walk before he knew her face. The way she moved, controlled, deliberate, like every step was a decision she'd already made 3 times before taking it. He'd watched her walk into hotel lobbies, into restaurants, into rooms full of people who didn't know what she meant to him. He knew that walk. His body stopped. Not froze, stopped. Like a machine that receives a signal it wasn't built to process. The bride lifted her veil slightly and turned to receive her bouquet from the attendant, and Roman saw her face in full for the first time in 18 months. Elena. The room kept moving. The organ kept playing. 100 people smiled and shifted in their seats and dabbed their eyes at the beauty of it all. Roman sat completely still in the back pew and could not make himself breathe in a normal way. 3 years. Hotels in 4 cities. A key card she kept in her coat pocket that opened his apartment door in Geneva. A Sunday morning where she'd read the newspaper in his kitchen wearing his shirt and he'd thought, quietly, to himself, afraid to say it out loud, "This is the thing I want." And now she was walking down the aisle toward his brother. Alexei waited at the altar. Roman made himself look. Made himself study his brother's face. Alexei was smiling the way Roman had never seen him smile. Not the polished, public smile he wore in board meetings or family photographs. Something underneath that. Something open and unguarded and completely, painfully real. Alexei had no idea. Roman was almost certain of that. Almost. He watched Elena reach the altar. Watched Alexei take her hands. Watched his brother look at her like she was the only solid thing in a room that might otherwise float away. Roman looked down at the program in his lap. His fingers had folded the edge without him noticing. That's when he saw the child. Front pew. Beside an older woman who had to be Elena's mother, same dark hair, same precise posture. A little girl, 4 years old, maybe 5. She was wearing a white dress with a yellow ribbon that had already come slightly loose, the way ribbons always do on small children within the first 20 minutes of any formal event. She wasn't watching the ceremony. She kept turning around. Slowly, systematically, the way children do when they're looking for something specific and haven't found it yet. Her eyes moved across the rows of guests, row by row, face by face. Patient. Searching. Roman told himself, niece. Cousin. A friend's child given a seat of honor because someone needed a place to put her. He told himself this, and he believed it, and then the girl turned around again and her eyes swept past his section and he told himself it again, just to be sure. Niece. Cousin. Nothing. At the altar, the officiant began the vows. Elena's voice was steady. Calm. She had always been calm in ways Roman could never quite explain, not cold, not distant, just settled somewhere deep inside herself that most people couldn't reach. She made her promises to Alexei without a tremor. And she did not look toward the back of the church. Not once. Roman had been in enough negotiations to know what deliberate looked like. He knew the difference between someone who forgot to look and someone who had decided not to. Elena had decided. Which meant she knew he was here. Which meant she had a reason for looking away. The ring went on her finger. The crowd applauded. Someone behind Roman said beautiful in a whispered voice, and he stood with everyone else because sitting would have drawn attention he couldn't afford. He would leave. Right now, through the side door, back to the hotel, on a plane by evening. He would make this an accident of geography, a wrong turn, an early landing, a story that never needed to be told. He turned toward the exit. The guests were flooding the aisle. Laughter, flowers, the chaos of 100 people trying to reach someone they love after the best part of a ceremony. Roman kept his head down and moved toward the side door. He felt something touch his hand. Small fingers. Careful, like a question. He looked down. The little girl stood beside him. She'd slipped away from Elena's mother without anyone noticing, the way small children manage to go missing in crowds without technically disappearing. She looked up at him with an expression that wasn't shy and wasn't bold. Just curious. Steady. She studied his face the way children do when they haven't yet learned that staring is impolite. Then she said, in a voice that was perfectly calm for someone her size, "Are you lost too?" Roman looked at her. He had no answer. If that question hit you the way it hit us, drop a comment below, we read every single one. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is only just beginning. Roman made it to the side door before the applause finished. He didn't run. He walked, the careful, controlled walk of a man who has spent 20 years making sure no room ever saw him rattled. He kept his coat on, kept his head level, and didn't look back at the little girl standing in the aisle behind him. He didn't let himself think about what she'd said until he was outside. The cold air hit him. He stood on the stone steps of the church and stared at the street for a moment, the ordinary Saturday afternoon of it, people walking dogs, a cafe with steamed-up windows, a taxi waiting at the corner, and he thought, I need to get to the hotel. That was the only thought he allowed himself. One step at a time. The room was clean and quiet and exactly the kind of anonymous he needed. Roman sat on the edge of the bed in his travel coat and did not move for a long time. Then he started counting backward. He and Elena had met 4 years ago. She was a legal associate at the firm the Voss Group used for acquisitions in Central Europe, sharp, prepared, the kind of professional who answered questions before they were fully asked. He'd noticed her because she was the only person in a 3-hour meeting who never once checked her phone. 3 years of meetings in cities that weren't home. Geneva. Vienna. Prague once, briefly, in winter. He had told himself they were building toward something. He was in the process of finalizing his divorce, a long, quiet, exhausting process, and Elena never pushed. Never asked for a timeline. Never gave him an ultimatum. He had loved her for that. He had read her patience as trust. Sitting in this hotel room, he understood something he hadn't let himself understand before. She never pushed because she already knew where it was going. And it wasn't toward him. Roman picked up his phone and called his assistant. I need a favor. Personal, not professional. Helena, he stopped. He didn't know her last name. He'd never needed to look it up. The woman who married Alexei today. I need whatever's publicly available. Her and the child. His assistant didn't ask questions. That was why Roman had kept her for 11 years. He set the phone down and waited. He thought about the last time he'd seen Elena. 18 months ago, a hotel in Vienna, their city, the one that had somehow become theirs without either of them deciding it. She'd arrived on time, ordered coffee, and within 20 minutes told him she needed to disappear for a while. No tears. No anger. No explanation that made real sense. I need some time away from everything. Please don't look for me. He had assumed guilt. The clean getaway of someone whose conscience had finally caught up with them. He had assumed another man, someone uncomplicated, someone who could offer her a life that didn't require hotel rooms and discretion. He had been correct on both. He just had the order wrong. His assistant called back in 40 minutes. Alexei and Elena had been publicly together for 14 months. Photographs, a shared apartment listing, a joint appearance at a charity event last spring. It was all there, sitting openly on the internet, available to anyone who thought to look. Roman had not thought to look. He hadn't known there was anything to look for. The child, he said. What's her name? Mila. She appears on the mother's social media going back approximately 3 years. Roman was quiet for a moment. How far back exactly? The earliest photo I can find is 3 years and 2 months ago. A park. The child looks very young, newborn, maybe a few weeks old. Roman thanked her and ended the call. He sat very still with the phone in his hand and did the math. He did it 3 times, because the first 2 times he got an answer he didn't want. 3 years and 2 months ago, he and Elena were 8 months into what he had believed was the beginning of something that mattered. She had been in his life. In his apartment. In his kitchen on Sunday mornings. He put the phone face down on the bed. He didn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, something pulled him back to his phone. He didn't know what he was looking for. He told himself he was just checking messages. He opened Elena's profile instead, public, as his assistant had said, visible to anyone. He scrolled slowly. The photographs were careful, warm, and deliberately ordinary. Mila at a playground. Mila with a plate of pancakes she was clearly more interested in destroying than eating. Mila in autumn leaves. Mila at what looked like a fourth birthday party, holding a balloon in one hand and laughing at something outside the frame. Roman almost kept scrolling. Then he saw the coat. He stopped. He made the photo larger with his fingers and stared at it. It was red, a deep, specific shade of red, wool, with a collar that folded down in a particular way. Child-sized, but the same cut. The same buttons. He knew those buttons because he'd stood in a shop in Milan and chosen them himself, pointing at a sample card while a tailor waited patiently. He had bought that coat for himself 18 months ago, during a weekend where the cold came earlier than expected and he hadn't packed for it. It had sat in his apartment in Geneva for 2 weeks. Then he moved apartments. Elena had helped him pack. One weekend, boxes and bags, her handwriting on the labels. He remembered being grateful. He remembered thinking it was the kind of thing a person did when they were building something with someone. The coat had not arrived at the new apartment. He hadn't noticed. He'd assumed a box had been lost in transit, or left behind, or donated without him realizing. He hadn't thought about it again. He was thinking about it now. He stared at the red coat on a little girl holding a birthday balloon, and he understood that it had not been lost. It had been taken. And the person who took it had known exactly whose child would wear it. If you felt something just now, drop a comment below. You're not alone. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because what Roman finds next will change everything you think you know about this story. He should have been on a plane. That was the rational thing. Book the evening flight, go back to Geneva, let the silence between him and Alexei return to its comfortable, managed distance. Roman was good at managed distance. He had built an entire life on it. Instead, at 4 in the afternoon, he answered a call from Alexei's assistant and said yes to a wedding dinner he had no business attending. He told himself it was to watch. To understand. To sit in a room with Elena and read her face the way he had once known how to read it, and find the thing she wasn't saying. He put on a clean shirt and went. The venue was the kind of place that cost more than it looked, understated, warm, exactly 40 guests in a private room with long candles and low music. Roman arrived late enough to be unremarkable and took a seat near the back. Elena was at the head table. He watched her the way you watch something that no longer belongs to you, carefully, from a distance, with the specific pain of someone who remembers every detail. She was composed. Warm without being soft. She laughed at the right moments, touched Alexei's arm at the right moments, kept Mila in her peripheral vision at all times the way mothers do, that quiet tracking instinct that looks like nothing and is everything. She was also, Roman knew, completely aware that he was in the room. He saw the moment she found him. Across 40 people and 10 tables and 2 servers carrying champagne trays, her eyes moved to exactly where he was sitting, held for half a second, and moved away. She didn't flinch. That was the thing that stayed with him. Most people, caught in a situation like this, flinch. Elena simply recalibrated and returned to her conversation, and 30 seconds later, she excused herself from the table and slipped through the side doors to the garden. Roman waited 90 seconds. Then he followed. The garden was cold and strung with lights that someone had put up for the occasion. Elena was standing near a stone bench with her arms crossed, not defensive, just warm. She'd come outside without her wrap. She heard him on the gravel and didn't turn around. "You weren't supposed to come," she said. "Not I'm surprised you're here. Not Roman, we need to talk." She said it like someone checking a list and finding an item that shouldn't be there. Like she had planned for every other possibility and he was the one gap in an otherwise complete system. That detail landed somewhere cold in his chest. "Alexei invited me," he said. "I know. I saw the guest list." She turned around then. Same steady face. Same careful eyes. "I didn't think you'd accept." "I almost didn't." They stood about 4 feet apart in the cold garden, and Roman looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the church. He was searching for something. He wasn't sure what. Guilt, maybe. Or an explanation that lived on her face before she decided whether to speak it. What he found was something closer to exhaustion. Deep, long-running exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying something heavy for so long you've stopped noticing the weight. "Elena. Mila is happy." Her voice was quiet and completely firm. "That's what matters now. Please don't do this. Not there's nothing to discuss. Not you're imagining things." She had named Mila first. Before anything else. Before any explanation or defense. Roman opened his mouth. And then he saw the doorway. Mila was standing at the garden entrance, still in her white dress with the yellow ribbon, slightly more disheveled now, the way children become over the course of an evening. She had a bread roll in one hand that she was holding with complete seriousness, like it was an object of great importance. She wasn't looking at Elena. She was looking at Roman. The same way she'd looked at him in the church aisle. That focused, unhurried study, like she was trying to work something out. Like she had a question she didn't have the words for yet. Roman looked back at her. For a moment nobody moved. Then Mila glanced at her mother, apparently decided whatever was happening was adult business and therefore beneath her current interest, and walked back inside. Roman turned to Elena. Elena was watching the empty doorway with an expression he couldn't name, something that lived between relief and pain and something else entirely. She came back to him after a moment and said, quietly, "Go back inside, Roman. Please." He went. Dinner was served. Toasts were made. Roman sat at his table and ate food he couldn't taste and watched his brother be happy in the specific way of a man who has been unhappy for a long time and doesn't quite believe the good thing yet. Alexei stood for his toast halfway through the main course. He was not a polished speaker. He was too earnest for polish, his voice kept catching on things, words that meant more to him than he'd anticipated when he practiced them. The room went soft around him. Even Roman felt it. "Elena came into my life at the exact moment I'd stopped believing things could get better," Alexei said. He smiled. "I was in bad shape. I don't mind admitting that now." A few people laughed warmly. "She showed up, and she just believed in me. Before I'd given her any real reason to." He paused and looked down the table at Elena, who was watching him with an expression Roman recognized. That was how she looked at someone she had decided to protect. "So I want to give a date," Alexei said. "Because I think it matters. 2 years and 3 months ago, that's when I got the first message from her. That's when everything actually started." He raised his glass. The room raised theirs. Roman set his glass down very carefully and did the math. 2 years and 3 months ago, that was 4 months before Elena had ended things with him. 4 months before the Vienna hotel and the calm, tearless goodbye and I need to disappear for a while. But not 4 months before she'd started pulling away. He could see it now, looking back, the messages that took longer to come, the cancelled weekend in Prague, the distance that he'd read as stress and she'd never corrected. He counted backward again. More carefully this time. The overlap was 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, Elena had been building something with Alexei while still inside what Roman believed was their relationship. Someone had been living 2 timelines at once. He looked at Elena across the room. She was smiling at something Alexei was saying to the guest on his left. She did not look in Roman's direction. He thought about her words in the garden. "You weren't supposed to come. Not I'm glad you're here or this is complicated or let me explain. Just, you weren't supposed to come." Which meant there was a version of tonight she had planned for. And he had broken it. The question that sat with him through dessert, through coffee, through the slow departure of guests he didn't know, was simple and had no comfortable answer. Who was the one lying about the timeline? Elena? Or was it possible, in some way he couldn't yet map, that it was Alexei? Tell us in the comments, who do you think is lying? We read every theory. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're there when the next chapter drops. Alexei called at 8:15 in the morning, which meant he'd been awake for a while, working up to it. Roman was already dressed. He hadn't slept much, just enough to make the exhaustion manageable, and he was standing at the hotel window with cold coffee when the phone rang and his brother's name appeared on the screen. He almost didn't answer. He answered. Alexei's voice was warmer than Roman had heard it in years. The careful distance they'd both maintained, the formal calls, the short messages, the polite nothing of 2 brothers who had stopped knowing how to be brothers, was gone. In its place was something that sounded almost like the person Roman remembered from before everything got complicated. "I'm glad you came," Alexei said. "I know you didn't have to. I almost didn't. I know." A pause. "Stay for a few weeks. I mean it. We've lost too much time, Roman. I'd like to get some of it back." Roman knew what the right answer was. The safe answer. "I have work in Geneva, I'll call you next month, we'll find a time." The managed distance answer. "All right," he said. "A few weeks." He heard Alexei exhale, a small sound, genuine, the kind you can't manufacture. And that sound was the most painful thing Roman had experienced since walking into that church. Because Alexei meant it. That was clear. His brother wanted him back, trusted him in this house, near this family, and had absolutely no idea what Roman was carrying into that invitation. Roman hung up and immediately called a private investigator he'd used twice before for corporate work, discreet, thorough, and expensive enough to stay that way. The instruction was simple: Mila. Date of birth, legal parentage, whatever is on official record. Nothing else. He was clear about that. Nothing else. He wasn't ready for anything else. The investigator called back in under 24 hours. Roman took the call in the hotel lobby, away from his room, as if the walls there already knew too much. "Birth record shows Elena as mother," the investigator said. "Father line is blank." Roman waited for more. That's it? That's what's on record. Blank father isn't unusual, common in cases where paternity is undeclared, disputed, or simply not submitted. It tells us nothing confirmed in either direction. Roman thanked him and ended the call. He stood in the hotel lobby for a moment with the phone in his hand. A blank line where a name should be. He had wanted facts, and what he had received was the most expensive non-answer of his life. Not unusual. He turned that phrase over. Common in cases where paternity is undeclared. Or hidden. He put the phone in his pocket and went to have lunch with his brother's family. The apartment was everything Roman's life currently wasn't: warm, slightly too loud, smelling of something cooking that had been cooking for a long time. Alexei met him at the door with genuine ease, the kind that belongs to people who are happy in their own homes. Mila was already in the dining room, standing on a chair she had no business standing on, investigating the top shelf of a bookcase with the serious focus of an archaeologist. "Mila, the chair is not for climbing," Elena said from the kitchen doorway, in the tone of someone who has said this exact sentence many times and expects to say it many more. Mila stepped down without argument, then immediately began rearranging the items on the coffee table into a pattern that made sense only to her. Roman watched her. She had Elena's stillness when she concentrated, that same quality of going completely inward while her hands stayed busy. He noticed it and then made himself stop noticing it, and then noticed it again. Lunch was served. The conversation moved the way family conversations do, over each other, around corners, landing on small things and staying there. Alexei asked Roman about Geneva. Mila asked Alexei why pasta had holes in it. Elena refilled glasses without being asked. It was ordinary. Painfully, specifically ordinary. And then Mila looked across the table at Roman with the direct gaze she seemed to reserve for him specifically, and asked, "Papa, why doesn't Uncle Roman have any pictures?" The table went momentarily quiet. Alexei laughed, a real laugh, warm and a little embarrassed. "What pictures, sweetheart?" "On his phone." She said it with complete confidence, as if this were a known fact requiring explanation. "Everybody has pictures. Mama has pictures. You have pictures. Uncle Roman showed me his phone and there's nothing." Roman had no memory of showing her his phone. He must have set it down at the wrong moment. He looked at her. "I have pictures." Mila considered this seriously. Of what? He had no answer that would satisfy a 4-year-old. Buildings. Contracts. Cities from hotel windows. Alexei rescued him with another laugh and redirected Mila toward her food. The moment passed. But Elena hadn't laughed. Roman looked at her without meaning to. She was watching him, not Mila, not Alexei, with an expression he couldn't place. It wasn't guilt. He knew what guilt looked like on a person, he'd been in enough boardrooms. It wasn't relief either. It was something older than both of those things. If he had to name it, he would have called it grief. She looked away before he could be certain. His phone buzzed as he was leaving. The investigator. Roman stepped into the building's stairwell to take the call. "Second piece," the investigator said. "Elena changed her legal name 14 months ago. Standard filing, nothing unusual about the process. Before that, she used her mother's surname." Roman was quiet. The name she was using when you would have known her professionally, it wasn't her legal name. It was a name she operated under, but it was never on her official documents. No employment contracts under that name, no registered addresses, no legal filings. Roman leaned against the stairwell wall. 3 years. 3 years of hotels and meetings and a key card she kept in her coat pocket. 3 years of what he believed was a real person choosing him, wanting him, building something with him. And the name he had known her by, the name he'd said quietly in the dark in hotel rooms in 4 cities, was not her name. Which meant he had no verified address. No confirmed employment history. No legal record of contact. No thread he could pull that wouldn't simply dissolve. He thought about the way she'd said you weren't supposed to come, as if she had prepared for everything except him. He thought about the blank line on the birth record. He thought about 3 years. And he understood, standing in that stairwell, that he didn't actually know who Elena was. Not her name. Not her history. Not her reasons. Not whether a single thing she had told him in 3 years was something he could verify. He had been certain he was looking for the truth about Mila. He was only now realizing he didn't even know the truth about Elena. Drop your theory in the comments, because nothing about this is what it looks like. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the moment this story breaks wide open. She picked a cafe 3 blocks from the apartment. Neutral ground. Public enough to stay controlled, quiet enough to talk. Roman arrived first and watched her walk in. And even now, even after everything, he noticed that she still moved like someone who had already decided how the room was going to go. She sat down. Didn't take off her coat. Didn't order anything. Thank you for coming, Roman said. I almost didn't. She folded her hands on the table. But I think you deserve one honest conversation. So, ask me what you actually want to ask. He asked about the name first. She didn't flinch. I used my mother's surname professionally for years. When I left that life, I went back to my legal name. That's all. That's not all. A pause. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, and something behind her eyes shifted. Like a door unlocking. Like someone who has rehearsed a speech 100 times and has finally decided to actually give it. I was never a legal associate, she said. Roman went still. I was placed inside the Voss Group's firm by a competitor. Corporate espionage. My job was to get close to the acquisition team and copy files before the Meridian deal closed. She said it the way you confess something you've confessed before, in your head, alone, at 2 in the morning, until the words stop feeling like anything. I did it for 8 months. I was very good at it. The cafe noise continued around them. Someone laughed at the counter. Roman didn't move. And then, he said. And then I wasn't good at it anymore. She looked at her hands. I stopped reporting. I deleted what I had. I disappeared. A breath. You want me to say I fell in love with you and it ruined everything? So yes. That's what happened. It ruined everything. He believed her. That was the thing he hadn't expected, how much he believed her. How cleanly it fit. The name change made sense now. The vanishing made sense. The cold, tearless goodbye in Vienna made sense, because she hadn't been leaving him out of cruelty. She'd been running. From the organization. From the exposure. From what happened when handlers discovered their operative had gone silent. He'd spent 4 days building a theory about Mila. He'd barely slept. He'd hired someone and checked records and stared at a red coat in a photograph until his eyes ached. And Mila, he said. He kept his voice level. Who is her father? A man I knew before you. Still steady. Still that direct eye contact she used when she wanted you to know she wasn't hiding. Brief. Over before it started. He's gone and he's not part of this story and he never will be. Roman looked at her. She has nothing to do with me. No. A single word. Clean and flat and final. She doesn't. He asked the last question quietly. Then why Alexei? For the first time, something shifted in her face. Not guilt, something more tired than guilt. Because he didn't know anything, she said. He didn't know my past, didn't ask about it, didn't have enemies I'd created or files I'd copied or people who might one day come looking. He just, she stopped. Started again. He was safe. For Mila, he was safe. And she needed that more than I needed anything else. She reached for her bag. Stood up. I didn't choose him over you, Roman. She said it like she'd been carrying it for a long time and wanted to put it down. I chose Mila over everything. That's the whole story. That's all of it. Then she walked out. Same deliberate walk. Same straight back. Roman sat at the table alone and didn't move for a while. He miscounted. That was the explanation. He'd done the math wrong, sleep-deprived and spiraling, and the numbers had told him a story that wasn't there. The red coat was a coincidence, Elena had helped him move, she'd probably grabbed it by accident, a child-sized version happened to match. It happened. Things like that happened. He called the investigator that afternoon. Close it, he said. I don't need anything further. He packed the file away in his head. Sealed it. Not because he felt good, he didn't feel good. He felt like someone had reached into his chest and rearranged something important, and he wasn't sure the pieces had gone back in the right order. But he understood now. That was the thing. He finally understood, and understanding, even when it hurt, was better than the not knowing that had been eating him alive for 4 days. He texted Alexei. Still here. Take you up on that lunch tomorrow if the offer stands. The reply came in under a minute. It stands. Mila will be thrilled. She keeps asking about your phone. Roman almost smiled. Almost. He ordered coffee. He sat with the wreckage of 3 years and tried to figure out which parts were worth keeping and which parts he needed to let go. He started, slowly, to let it go. 3 days passed. Good days, actually. Or days that were trying to be good. Lunch with Alexei turned into an afternoon, which turned into a walk, which turned into the kind of easy silence that used to exist between them before everything got complicated. It didn't fix 2 years of distance. But it began to. Mila decided Roman was interesting mostly because he didn't know the rules of the card game she'd invented, which meant she could change them freely and he couldn't argue. He lost 5 times in a row and she was very gracious about it. He was sleeping again. Eating actual meals. He'd stopped counting backward. He was sitting at the hotel desk on the 3rd evening when his phone buzzed. The investigator. Which didn't make sense, he'd closed the case, paid the balance, ended the contact. He almost didn't open it. He opened it. I know you terminated the engagement. Not sending this as a bill. Found something I couldn't sit on. Hospital admission, 4 years ago. Patient name matches your subject's original surname. Admission reason, complicated delivery, premature birth, 34 weeks gestation. Roman's eyes moved to the next line. Date of admission, 4 years ago this March. He sat very still and did not breathe for a moment. 4 years ago this March. He and Elena had met 4 years ago in February. The math he had told himself was wrong, the math he had decided he miscounted, came back. Slowly. Precisely. Every number landing exactly where it had landed the first time. He hadn't miscounted. He had just chosen to believe her instead. If that last line hit you somewhere quiet, you're not alone in the comments, drop what you're thinking, because this story just changed shape entirely. Subscribe and turn on notifications. What comes next is the moment everything breaks open. The hospital record was 1 page. Roman printed it at the hotel business center at 7 in the morning, folded it once, and carried it back to his room. He set it on the desk. He made coffee. He stood at the window and looked at the street below for a long time. Then he sat down and read it again. Slowly. Like maybe the words would rearrange themselves if he gave them enough time. They didn't. Complicated delivery. Premature birth. 34 weeks. The date was right there in black ink, specific and immovable, and when Roman counted backward from that date, carefully, the way he should have done the first time instead of letting Elena's steady eyes talk him out of his own math, he landed in a month he recognized. The month they met. He sat with that for the rest of the day. He didn't call anyone. He didn't move much. He just sat with the thing he now knew and thought about what knowing it was going to cost. Because understanding it meant one thing, and one thing only. It meant destroying his brother's life. He didn't go to Elena. That surprised him a little, for days ago he would have been at her door within the hour. But something had changed in him overnight. The urgency was gone, replaced by something colder and more careful. He needed to watch first. He needed to understand what everyone already knew before he walked into a room and blew it apart. So he watched. He watched Alexei at dinner, the easy way his brother touched Elena's shoulder when he passed behind her chair, the unconscious, habitual love of someone who has been happy long enough to stop noticing it. No performance in it. No awareness of being observed. He watched Elena watch Alexei back. And that was the thing he couldn't stop returning to. She wasn't pretending. Whatever she felt for his brother was real. Roman could see it and it made everything worse and more complicated and he had no idea what to do with it. He watched Mila most of all. The park was Mila's idea. She had announced at breakfast, with the total authority of a 4-year-old who has decided something, that Roman needed to see the good swings. Not the regular swings. The good ones, which were apparently at the park 2 blocks away and required an immediate visit. Alexei had a call. Elena had agreed to take her, then been pulled back inside by something, a phone, a delivery, Roman couldn't tell. So somehow it was Roman and Mila, walking 2 blocks in the cold with her hand in his because she'd grabbed it without asking, the way children take things they decide belong to them. She went straight for the swings without looking back to check if he was following. He pushed her for a while. She gave detailed instructions on height, speed, and what she considered an unacceptable level of effort. Roman followed instructions. After a few minutes she went quiet. That focused, inward quiet he'd noticed before, like she was sorting through something. I used to live in a different house, she said, conversationally, to no one in particular. Roman kept pushing. Before this apartment? The quiet house. She said it like it was a name. It was very quiet. Mama used to cry there sometimes when she thought I was asleep. A pause. I wasn't asleep. Roman's hand slowed slightly on the swing. A man used to come, she continued. Still that same easy tone, a child reporting facts. I don't remember his face. I was little. She thought about it. I remember his coat, though. It was dark. Heavy. She twisted on the swing to look back at him. Like yours. Roman looked at her. She looked back at him with the same steady, curious expression she'd had since the church aisle, like she was still working something out. Like she'd been working it out for a while. Then she turned around and said, "Higher please," and the moment closed. Roman pushed the swing higher and didn't say a word. He found the photograph by accident. The wedding photographer had sent a shared folder link to the family, candid shots, behind-the-scenes moments, pictures that didn't make the final album. Alexei had forwarded it to Roman without thinking, just being inclusive, just being the version of his brother who wanted him inside the circle now. Roman had opened it looking for nothing in particular. He almost scrolled past it. It was a personal photo Elena had uploaded into the same folder by mistake, or had stored somewhere that synced automatically, or had miscategorized. It didn't matter how it got there. What mattered was that it was there. Elena, alone. Standing at a window, looking out. Her back was mostly to the camera, her face in three-quarter profile. She wasn't posing. She didn't know the photo was being taken, or she'd forgotten. She was just standing there, holding something, he couldn't see what, looking out at a view Roman recognized immediately. He had stood at that window 100 times. His apartment in Geneva. The river bend, the specific shape of the bridge, the angle of the light. He knew every detail of that view because he had spent 4 years waking up to it. He made the photo larger. Found the timestamp in the metadata. 4 years ago. March. The same month as the hospital record. The month Mila would have been a newborn. Roman sat in his hotel room with his phone in his hand and felt the floor shift under everything. She had been in his apartment. With an infant. Or just after. She had stood at his window, in his city, and he had never known. He texted her one line, "I need to see you. Tonight. Alone." She took 20 minutes to reply. "Okay." He showed her the photograph without saying anything. Just placed his phone on the table between them, screen up, and waited. Elena looked at it. A long look. She didn't pick up the phone. She didn't ask where he got it. She just looked at it, and whatever wall she'd been holding in place for 4 years, the composed face, the steady eyes, the controlled answers, quietly came apart. Not tears. Not words. Just silence. A silence so complete and so heavy that it answered every question Roman had spent a week building. He waited. Finally she said, in a voice that was very quiet and very tired, "I didn't tell you because I knew what you would do." Roman didn't move. "I knew which choice you would make." She looked up at him. "You would have done the right thing. You would have arranged everything properly. Lawyers, schedules, decisions." Something moved across her face, not anger, not blame. Grief. "And I couldn't let Mila be someone's decision. She needed to be someone's child." The room was completely still. Roman opened his mouth. The door opened. Alexei stood in the doorway. He took in the room, Elena's face, Roman's face, the phone on the table, the specific texture of the silence, and he went very still. He looked at Roman. And then he said, quietly, with a calm that didn't belong to someone who'd just walked in on a surprise, "How long have you known?" Roman stared at his brother. Not what's going on or someone explain this to me. Not confusion, not anger. How long have you known? Which meant Alexei already knew something. The only question left, the one that changed every single thing, was how much. And when he found out. If Alexei's question just rewrote everything you thought you understood, leave a comment below, because this story is not what any of us thought it was. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here when the next chapter answers the question that just broke everything open. Nobody moved. Alexei stood in the doorway with that one question hanging in the air between all three of them, "How long have you known?" And Roman watched his brother's face and tried to understand what he was actually looking at. Not shock. That was the thing. Alexei's face had the look of a man doing math he already knew the answer to, checking his work one final time. Roman said, carefully, "Known what, exactly?" Alexei stepped inside. He closed the door behind him. He looked at Elena. "Tell me I'm wrong," he said. Elena didn't answer. That was her answer. The silence that followed was the kind that reorganizes a room. Roman could feel it, the way everything that had existed between the three of them before this moment was quietly being replaced by something else. Something that had no name yet. Alexei pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. Not dramatically. Not in anger. He sat down the way a man sits when his legs need a moment and his mind is working too hard to manage both things at once. "She told me about the espionage," he said, to Roman, not to Elena. "Before the wedding. Everything. The Voss Group assignment, the files, what she was placed there to do." He paused. "She told me you were involved. Not the details. Just that there was a history." Roman glanced at Elena. She was looking at the table. "I married her anyway," Alexei said. "Not as a declaration. Just as a fact. Because what she told me took honesty I didn't expect, and because I'd already decided she was the person I wanted." He pressed his hands flat on the table. "What she didn't tell me." He stopped. He looked at Elena again. And this time what Roman saw on his brother's face wasn't anger. It was something much harder to watch. It was a man holding himself very still while something inside him quietly broke. "Is it true?" Alexei asked her. Elena looked up. "Yes." One word. The room absorbed it. Alexei was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Roman and asked one question. "Did you know when you came to the wedding?" Roman held his brother's eyes. "No. I didn't know anything until after." Alexei studied him. 5 seconds. 10. The way you look at someone when you're deciding whether to believe them, not analyzing their words, just looking at them, at what lives underneath the words. Then he nodded once. And Roman understood that nod was the only thing keeping the three of them in the same room right now. If Alexei had decided he was lying, this conversation would have ended differently. Okay, Alexei said quietly. Okay. He didn't say anything else for a while. Elena spoke first, and when she did, her voice was steady in the way it gets when a person has accepted that the thing they were most afraid of is now simply happening and there's nothing left to protect. I was going to take it to my grave, she said. I want you both to understand that. This was never going to come out. I built everything to make sure it didn't. Why? Roman asked. Not accusatory. He genuinely needed to hear her say it. Because I knew what would happen. She looked at him. Not cruelty. I'm not saying you're cruel. I'm saying I knew what the responsible version of Roman Voss does when he discovers he has a child. He calls lawyers. He arranges schedules. He does everything correctly. Her voice stayed level. And Mila would have grown up knowing she was the thing that got arranged. The obligation. The right thing someone did. The words landed somewhere specific in Roman's chest. He wanted to argue. He opened his mouth to argue. And then he stopped. Because he couldn't promise she was wrong. He could promise he would have tried. He could promise his intentions would have been good. But intentions weren't what Elena had been afraid of. She'd been afraid of exactly what he would have done with them. He closed his mouth. Alexei had been watching both of them. And me, he asked Elena quietly. Where do I go in this version? You chose her, Elena said. Without conditions. Without history. Without a legal framework for what she meant to you. Something flickered across her face. That's not nothing, Alexei. That's everything. It was built on something you hid from me. Yes. She didn't soften it. It was. The three of them sat with that. Roman looked at his brother and tried to see past the decade of distance between them, past the formal cards and the returned calls and the 2 years of silence. He tried to see the person Alexei actually was, the man who had heard that his wife had run a corporate espionage operation against his own family and had married her anyway because she'd had the courage to tell him the truth. That was not a small thing. And now that same man was sitting across from both of them, recalculating his entire life in real time, and still hadn't raised his voice. Roman said, quietly, I'm not here to take anything. Alexei looked at him. I don't know what I am yet, Roman continued. But I'm not here to take anything from you. Or from her. Or from Mila. He stopped. I just needed to know the truth. That's all I came here for. And now you know it, Alexei said. Now I know it. Another silence. Different from the others, not filled with calculation or grief. Something more exhausted than that. Three people who had each lost something sitting in a room together, trying to figure out if any of it could be rebuilt into a shape that worked. Roman wanted to be acknowledged, he knew that about himself now, clearly and without defense. Alexei wanted his marriage to survive. Elena wanted Mila behind a wall so high that none of this could reach her. 3 things. 3 people. And no version of the truth that gave all 3 of them what they needed. The hallway door opened. Not all the way, just enough. A small gap, and then Mila's face in it, hair slightly messy from wherever she'd been, holding the same bread roll from 3 days ago's dinner in a way that suggested it had become a permanent accessory. She looked at Elena. Then at Alexei. Then at Roman. Her eyes moved across all 3 of them with that slow, careful attention she had, the look of a child reading a room she wasn't supposed to be in and understanding more of it than anyone would expect. Then she asked, in a voice that was very small and very serious. Is somebody going away? Nobody answered. She looked at Roman when she asked it. Not at Alexei. Not at Elena. At Roman. If that question just broke something in you, you're not alone, leave a comment below, because the next chapter is where everything either falls apart or finds a way through. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here when it happens. Mila was still in the doorway. Still holding that bread roll. Still looking at Roman with the specific patience of a child who has asked a real question and is waiting for a real answer. Elena crossed the room and crouched down in front of her. At Mila's eye level. The way she always did when she had something important to say. Roman had seen it once before, at the park, and he understood now that it was a habit built on a promise. I will always come down to you. I will never talk at you from above. Something happened today that the grown-ups need to sort out, Elena said. Quiet. Direct. No softening that would create more confusion. It has nothing to do with you being in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong. Mila considered this. Is somebody going away? She asked again. Not tonight. Elena touched her face gently. I'll explain everything in words you can understand. I promise. But not right now. Mila looked past her mother, at Roman, one more time. Then she nodded, that simple, complete trust of a child who has always been told the truth, and went back down the hall. The door to her room clicked shut. The three adults stood in the silence she left behind, and Roman thought, that is the most complete act of faith I have ever watched a person perform. Elena turned around. Something was different in her face now. The last 4 years of careful composure, the walls she had built and maintained through a wedding, through Roman's return, through confrontations and confessions and a photograph she never meant anyone to see, were gone. What was underneath them was exhaustion. The deep, permanent kind. Sit down, she said. To both of them. Please. There's something I haven't told anyone. Roman sat. Alexei sat. Elena remained standing, like she needed to be on her feet for this. I told you I ended the operation because I fell in love with you, she said to Roman. That was true. But it wasn't the whole reason. Roman waited. I ended it because I found out I was pregnant. She said it without drama. Just placed it in the room. And 2 days after I found out, I discovered what my handlers planned to do with that information. The air in the room changed. They were going to let me have the child, Elena continued. Let me raise her. And if Roman ever became a problem, if he ever got close to finding out what I'd done, if he ever became useful, they were going to use her. As leverage. She paused. A child with Roman Voss's bloodline, in the hands of someone who knew exactly how to apply pressure. That's not a small thing to people like them. Roman heard the words. He understood them individually. It took him a moment to understand them all at once. You didn't disappear because of me, he said slowly. No. You disappeared because of them. Yes. She looked at him. The name change, the new city, the constructed history, choosing a man with no corporate enemies and no exposure, none of that was about hiding from you, Roman. It was about making Mila invisible to people who would have turned her into a tool the moment she was useful. The silence that followed was unlike any of the others. Roman thought about the name he'd said in hotel rooms in 4 cities. The name that wasn't her name. He had spent a week believing that was a betrayal. He understood now it was a burial. She had buried herself, every piece of the person she'd been, to make sure no one could follow the trail back to a little girl with a bread roll and a card game she invented herself. Everything you lost, he said. It came out quiet. Almost to himself. I didn't lose it. Elena's voice was steady. I chose it. There's a difference. Alexei had been very still during all of this. Roman glanced at him. His brother was looking at Elena with an expression Roman had seen once before, at the wedding altar, right before the vows. That open, unguarded look of a man who has just understood something at a depth that changes the shape of everything around it. You knew this when you told me the truth before the wedding, Alexei said. Not a question. I told you about the espionage, Elena said carefully. I didn't tell you the rest. I was afraid that knowing about the handlers, about the threat, would put you in a position you hadn't agreed to. So you protected me too. I tried to. Alexei looked down at his hands. Then he said, very quietly, you've been doing this alone for 4 years. Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. Roman stood up. He walked to the window, a different city, but the same instinct to put glass between himself and the weight of a room. He stood there and thought about the world he had built. The Voss Group. The acquisitions. The enemies that accumulated quietly around a man with that kind of reach, people who watched from distances he didn't know to measure. He had created the danger without knowing he created it. Mila had been living inside the shadow of it for 4 years, and he hadn't known she existed. Elena hadn't chosen Alexei over Roman. She had chosen the only exit that kept Mila out of range. And it had cost her, her name, her career, her history, the life she'd been building with a man who thought they were building it together. He was about to say something. He didn't know what yet, something true, something that acknowledged the scale of what she had carried, when his phone buzzed on the table. He almost ignored it. He didn't. Unknown number. No name. He picked it up and opened the message and felt the floor disappear beneath him. A photograph. Taken from outside, through glass, at an angle that meant whoever held the camera was standing in the street below or on a building across the way. The image was clear enough to show 3 people in a room, Elena, Alexei, Roman, in the last hour. His own face was visible. So was Elena's. Beneath the photograph, 1 line of text. We've been patient. The girl is old enough now. Roman read it twice. Then he looked up at Elena. She saw his face and went very still. What is it? She asked. He turned the phone around so she could see the screen. The color left her face completely. For years of careful architecture. For years of invisible walls and buried names and a life built in a shadow no one was supposed to find. For years of keeping Mila safe by keeping Mila secret. And someone had been watching the whole time. If that last line stopped your breath, you're not alone. Drop a comment below, because this story just became something else entirely. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because what Roman does next is going to change everything, for all of them. Roman was already on the phone before Elena finished reading the message. Not panicking. The opposite of panicking, that cold, focused state he recognized from every crisis he'd ever managed, where the noise drops out and only the necessary things remain. He had spent 20 years building a company that required him to be the calmest person in any emergency. That instinct activated now with a completeness that surprised even him. I need Hartman, he said to his security director. Tonight. And I need the full surveillance audit on the Meridian acquisition files going back 5 years. Everything. Don't wait for morning. He hung up. Made 2 more calls. Gave instructions he didn't have to explain twice. Then he turned to Elena and Alexei and said, don't go anywhere near the windows. And don't tell Mila anything has changed. Alexei asked no questions about the calls. He watched Roman move through the room, and when there was a pause, a brief moment between the second and third call, he said simply, tell me what I need to know. So Roman told him. All of it. The espionage context. The handlers. The reason Elena had built the life she'd built, brick by careful brick, in a city with no connection to Roman's name or Roman's enemies. The reason she had chosen a man with no corporate exposure and no profile that anyone would want to exploit. He told Alexei what Elena had protected him from by not telling him. He watched his brother take each piece of information and place it somewhere, not collapsing under it, not retreating, just absorbing it with the steady, deliberate focus of a person who has decided that understanding matters more than reacting. When Roman finished, Alexei was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, what does Mila need right now? Not how could Elena do this or what does this mean for us? For years of marriage to a woman who had been quietly terrified every day of it, and his first question was about his daughter. Roman looked at his brother and felt something shift inside him, some old, calcified version of how he'd understood Alexei, the younger brother, the one who didn't run things, quietly dissolve. She needs to not know anything is wrong, Roman said. For now. Alexei nodded and went down the hall. The security audit came back in pieces over the next 2 hours. Roman sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open and read each piece as it arrived, and the picture that assembled itself was not the one he had expected. The breach hadn't started with Elena. It had started inside the Voss Group itself, a senior executive, a man named Dreyer who had run the acquisitions division for 6 years. Embedded. Planted by the same organization long before Elena was ever assigned to the legal firm. Dreyer had been the original access point. Elena had been placed later to expand it. Roman read that and sat very still. He thought about the board meetings where Dreyer had sat 3 chairs to his left. The quarterly reviews, the dinners, the weekend at Dreyer's house in the Alps 4 years ago where they'd talked about the company's future until midnight. The trust that had accumulated naturally, invisibly, the way trust does between people who work closely for years. He was not a victim of Elena. He was a victim of his own house. Elena hadn't infiltrated his life from the outside. She'd been sent into a structure that was already compromised, through a door that was already open, because someone he considered a colleague had been quietly handing over keys for years before she arrived. He forwarded everything to his legal team and his security director with 4 words, expose it. All of it. Elena was in the hallway outside Mila's room. She had her back against the wall and her arms crossed, not in the composed, controlled way Roman had come to expect from her. She was holding herself together the way you do when you're very cold and there's nothing to do about it. Her eyes were moving, the door, the window at the end of the hall, the door again. Tracking. Calculating. Afraid in a way that her face had never once shown in any of their conversations over the past week. And Roman understood, looking at her, that she had always been this afraid. Every steady look. Every controlled answer. Every moment she had sat across from him with her hands folded and her voice level, she had been this terrified underneath all of it, and she had kept it invisible because Mila was 20 feet away and children can feel fear the way they feel weather, in the air before it arrives. For years of carrying that alone. He crossed the hallway and stood beside her without saying anything. After a moment, Alexei came out of Mila's room and stood on her other side. Nobody planned it. Nobody said let's stand together. They just did. And Roman looked at the 3 of them, reflected faintly in the dark window at the end of the hall, and understood something that rearranged the past week entirely. The question had never been Roman or Alexei. It had never been about which man Elena chose or which man deserved what. That was the story he had been telling himself since the moment he saw her walk down the aisle. It was the wrong story. The real question, the one Elena had been answering for 4 years, was simpler and harder than anything he'd imagined. Mila or the danger? Every decision she had ever made was the right answer to that question. Every one. By midnight, the photograph sender had gone silent. Roman's team had traced the message, identified the device, cross-referenced it with the access architecture Dreyer had built and maintained. When Roman's legal team contacted the relevant authorities with the full audit, every breach, every embedded agent, every file that had moved through channels it shouldn't have touched, the organization's leverage collapsed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It just went quiet, the way a threat does when it loses the thing that made it dangerous. Elena sat down for the first time in 4 hours. Alexei brought her tea. She held the cup in both hands without drinking it and stared at the table, and Roman watched her understand, slowly, that it was over. That the thing she had been running from and hiding from and building walls against for 4 years had finally been stopped. She didn't cry. She just breathed. Long, slow breaths that had somewhere to go now. Roman felt the tension leave the room in stages, like pressure releasing from something that had been sealed too long. He should have felt relief. He did feel relief. But underneath it, moving up through the quiet, was the thing that had no tactical solution. The thing his security team couldn't address and his legal team couldn't file away. Mila's door opened. She appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, hair flattened on one side from the pillow, squinting slightly at the light. She looked at the 3 adults arranged in the kitchen like they'd been there all night, because they had, and walked directly to Elena. Elena pulled her close automatically. Mila let herself be held for a moment. Then she leaned back and looked up at her mother with the serious, clear eyes she used when she had a real question. "Mama," she said. "Who is my real papa?" The kitchen was completely silent. Alexei looked at Roman. Roman looked at Elena. Elena looked at her daughter, and for the first time in 4 years, she had no prepared answer. No constructed story. No wall to stand behind. Just Mila, waiting, with the simple and total patience of a child who trusts that the truth will be given to her in words she can carry. If that question just stopped your heart the way it stopped ours, leave a comment, because the final chapter is where this family either breaks or becomes something real. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're there for the ending. Mila was still waiting. That was the thing about her, she never filled silence with noise the way most people did. She just waited, with those steady eyes, holding her question in the air between herself and her mother like she had all the time in the world and trusted that the answer would arrive. Elena looked at Roman. Roman looked at Alexei. Alexei looked at his daughter. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Alexei said, quietly, "Give us just a minute, sweetheart. Go sit on the sofa. We'll come to you." Mila studied each of them one more time. Then she went. The 3 of them stood in the kitchen and built the answer together. No lawyers. No ultimatums. No one staking a claim or drawing a line or deciding what they deserved. Just 3 people in a kitchen at midnight, choosing carefully, because the person who would carry what they said next was 4 years old and had done nothing to earn a complicated life. Roman spoke first. "She needs the truth. Enough of it to feel safe. Not all of it at once. She needs to know Alexei is her father," Elena said. Firm. Clear. Non-negotiable. "He is," Roman said. And he meant it, not as a legal position, not as a concession. He meant it the way you mean something when you've watched a man's first instinct, in a room full of things falling apart, be to ask what his daughter needs. Alexei looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up and said, "She also needs to know there's more to the story. Not now. But someday. She'll find out on her own if we don't tell her, and that's worse." Roman nodded. Elena closed her eyes briefly. "Opened them." "Okay," she said. "Okay." They went to the sofa together. Mila had her legs tucked underneath her and was examining a loose thread on the cushion with great focus, the way children occupy themselves when they're pretending not to be anxious. She looked up when the 3 adults arranged themselves, Elena beside her, Alexei on her other side, Roman in the chair across, and the look on her face was the most serious Roman had ever seen on anyone that small. Elena started. "You know how some families look different from other families?" Mila nodded. "Petra at school has 2 mamas. Right. Families can be built in lots of different ways." Elena kept her voice gentle and even. "You have Papa, who has been your Papa since before you can remember. And you also have Roman, who is, someone who is connected to you, in a way we're going to explain more as you get older." Mila looked at Roman. Back at Elena. Processing. "Is he a kind of Papa too?" she asked. The room was very still. Alexei answered. "I'm your Papa," he said. "That part doesn't change. I chose you. I've always chosen you. That won't ever be different." Mila thought about this seriously. She pulled at the loose thread. She looked at Roman, then back at Alexei. "Can I have 2 last names?" she asked. The question came out of nowhere and landed like something that had been sitting at the bottom of her for a long time, waiting for the right moment to surface. Roman didn't know where she'd heard about 2 last names. He didn't know if she fully understood what she was asking or if she was asking something simpler. Can there be more of me? Can I hold more than one thing? Alexei didn't hesitate. Yes, he said. Before Elena could speak. Before Roman could think. Just, yes. Complete and immediate and without conditions. Mila nodded, satisfied, like this resolved something she'd been working out for a while. Then she leaned against Alexei's arm and looked at Roman. What do I call you? She asked. Roman had not prepared for that question. He had prepared for almost nothing tonight, and this least of all. He looked at this child, this specific, serious, card game inventing, bread-roll carrying child who had walked up to him in a church aisle and asked if he was lost, and he understood that whatever he said next would be one of the most important things he ever said. He didn't claim her. He didn't name himself. He didn't reach for a title that would organize things into a shape that fit him. He said, I'd like to ask your permission to know you. If that's okay. The room was quiet. Elena made a sound, not a word, just a breath that broke slightly at the edges. Roman looked at her and found something he hadn't expected. Tears. Not from grief, not from relief in the way he'd seen before. From something else. Something that looked like 4 years of fear that a specific sentence would never be spoken, finally, quietly, being set down. Mila considered his request with the gravity it deserved. Okay, she said. But I get to decide the rules. That's fair, Roman said. She nodded, apparently satisfied, and announced she was going to bed. She climbed off the sofa, walked past Roman, stopped, patted his knee once with her small hand in a way that meant nothing and everything, and went down the hall. The 3 adults sat in the quiet she left and didn't say anything for a long time. 2 weeks later, Roman signed the papers. The legal mechanism his team had built was precise and expensive, a structure that permanently dismantled what remained of the organization's financial infrastructure, exposed the last of the access channels, and sealed the breach in a way that made reopening it more costly than any leverage Mila could ever provide. It left Roman financially exposed for a year. His legal team had flagged this. His financial advisors had flagged it twice. He signed without negotiating a single term. Some costs you don't bargain down. Some things you just pay. 3 weeks after the wedding he had attended by accident, Roman stood in the doorway of the kitchen apartment where his brother cooked dinner and a little girl did homework at the table. He wasn't sure of the etiquette. He wasn't sure he was allowed to simply walk in. He had been standing there long enough to feel awkward about it and not long enough to decide what to do when Mila looked up from her workbook. She took him in, the coat, the uncertainty, the way he was holding himself just outside the frame of something he didn't know how to enter. She looked back down at her workbook. You can sit down, she said. I don't bite. Roman sat down. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. Alexei moved around the kitchen behind them, and something was cooking that smelled like it had been going a long time, and outside the window the city did what cities do in the evening, noise and light and the ordinary ongoing rush of people going home. Roman sat at the table with his daughter, who didn't know yet everything that word meant, and watched her do her homework. It was not dramatic. It was not the ending he would have written for himself a month ago. It was better than that. It was real. It was the first day of something that had no name yet and didn't need one. The beginning, not the ending. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us which moment hit you the hardest, because we read every single one. If you love stories about family, truth, and the complicated ways people find their way back to each other, subscribe and turn on notifications. There's more where this came from.